Jack and Emma had always dreamed of owning a home like the one on Maple Street. It was an old Victorian-style house full of character and history. After years of saving and searching, they finally had enough to make it theirs. The house needed some work, but they saw potential in every creaky floorboard and dusty corner. Their first few weeks were a blur of unpacking, painting, and small repairs. The house seemed to welcome them, offering up little surprises like beautiful wood floors hidden beneath worn-out carpets and intricate moldings behind layers of paint. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. One Saturday afternoon, Jack was working in the basement, tackling the last bit of the renovation plan. He was tearing down an old, crumbling wall when his hammer struck something solid. Curious, he cleared away the debris to reveal a hidden door. Excitement and a bit of apprehension gripped him as he called Emma down to see his discovery. Together, they pried open the door, revealing a small, windowless room. Inside, they found an astonishing sight. Stacks of cash neatly bundled, vintage watches gleaming in the dim light, designer clothing carefully hung, and old electronic devices from the 90s arranged on shelves. It was a treasure trove, hidden away for who knew how long. Jack and Emma stood in the hidden room, hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The dim light from a single bare bulb cast eerie shadows on the walls, illuminating the treasures before them. Bundles of cash were stacked neatly in boxes, each bill crisp and new. Vintage watches, their faces glinting with a dull sheen, lay in velvet-lined cases. Designer clothing hung meticulously on racks, each piece preserved as if it had just come off the runway. On a dusty wooden shelf sat old electronic devices from the 90s, Walkmans, Game Boys, and clunky mobile phones that seemed out of place yet oddly fitting in this time capsule. "Jack, this is unbelievable," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "What do we do?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, still trying to process the discovery. "We can't tell anyone, not yet. We need to figure out where this came from and if anyone is looking for it." They spent the rest of the day cataloging their find, a surreal task that made them feel like characters in a crime novel. The money amounted to tens of thousands of dollars, and the watches alone were worth a small fortune. The clothing bore labels of high-end designers like Chanel, Gucci, and Prada, brands they had only ever admired from afar. The electronics were a nostalgic reminder of their youth, adding a bizarre charm to the hoard. As night fell, they locked the hidden room and sat down to discuss their next steps. The temptation to spend some of the money was overwhelming, but they knew they had to be cautious. The house had been vacant for years before they bought it, and there was no record of the previous owner's connection to any criminal activity. Still, they couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, might come looking for this hidden fortune. "We need to be smart about this," Jack said. "No big purchases that could draw attention. Just small things at first, things we can explain." Emma nodded in agreement. "We'll start with paying off our debts and maybe a few upgrades around the house. Nothing extravagant." The following weeks were a whirlwind of cautious excitement. They paid off their mortgage and credit card bills, feeling a weight lift off their shoulders. They bought a new car, trading in their old, unreliable vehicle for a sleek, modest sedan. It felt like a dream come true, but they were careful to keep their spending under wraps. Jack treated himself to a vintage Rolex, a symbol of success he had always coveted. He wore it with pride, but only on special occasions, not wanting to attract undue attention. Emma indulged in a designer handbag and a few pieces of clothing from their newfound collection, carefully choosing items that could pass as gifts or secondhand finds. They dined at expensive restaurants, savoring meals that were once out of reach. Weekends were spent at luxury spas and boutique hotels, a stark contrast to their previous budget getaways. They hosted lavish parties, inviting friends and family to their newly renovated home, basking in the admiration and envy of their guests. Despite their newfound wealth, they remained grounded, reminding themselves to be cautious. They kept the hidden room locked and avoided discussing it, even with each other. The fear of discovery lingered, but they were too caught up in their new lifestyle to care. Life continued to improve for Jack and Emma. Their home was now a place of comfort and luxury, filled with beautiful things they had never imagined owning. They reveled in the joy of financial freedom, each day bringing new delights. Yet, beneath the surface, a sense of unease began to grow. One evening, as they were lounging on their new Italian leather sofa, Jack turned to Emma with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever worry that this is all too good to be true?" Emma sighed, setting down her glass of vintage wine. "Of course I do. But we deserve this, Jack. We've worked hard all our lives. Maybe this is just our reward." Jack nodded, though the nagging doubt persisted. He had read enough stories to know that such windfalls often came with strings attached. But as the days turned into weeks and no one came knocking, he allowed himself to relax and enjoy their good fortune. Their spending habits grew bolder. They bought a state-of-the-art home theater system, transforming their basement into a private cinema. They took exotic vacations, posting carefully curated photos on social media to share their newfound happiness without revealing too much. Jack upgraded his wardrobe with bespoke suits, while Emma indulged in high-end skincare treatments and jewelry. The thrill of luxury began to overshadow their caution. They hosted extravagant dinner parties, hiring private chefs and sommeliers to impress their guests. Their friends marveled at their sudden good fortune, speculating about a lucrative investment or a surprise inheritance. Jack and Emma played along, spinning vague tales of wise financial decisions and lucky breaks. One evening, during a particularly lavish party, an old friend pulled Jack aside. "You've really turned things around, haven't you?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "What's your secret?" Jack laughed, brushing off the question with a practiced ease. "Just a bit of luck and some good investments," he replied. "Nothing more." But the questions kept coming, and Jack and Emma found it harder to maintain their facade. They became adept at deflecting inquiries and changing the subject, but the pressure of keeping their secret began to take its toll. They argued more frequently, the stress of their hidden fortune straining their once solid relationship. One night, after an especially heated argument, Emma sat alone in their bedroom staring at the designer clothes hanging in her closet. The thrill of luxury had faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of fear. She knew they couldn't go on like this forever. The money and items they had found were not theirs, and the longer they kept them, the greater the risk of discovery. Jack found her there, his expression softened by regret. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, sitting beside her. "I didn't mean to take it out on you. I'm just scared. Scared of losing everything we've gained, and scared of what might happen if someone finds out." Emma leaned into him, seeking comfort in his embrace. "I know, Jack. I'm scared too, but we can't let fear control us. We need to be smart about this." They decided to scale back their spending, focusing on maintaining a low profile. They sold some of the designer items, carefully laundering the money through small, inconspicuous transactions. They withdrew cash in small amounts, spreading their spending across multiple accounts to avoid detection. Their efforts to blend in worked for a while, but the pressure of their secret weighed heavily on them. They avoided the hidden room, treating it as a Pandora's box that should remain unopened. Yet, despite their best efforts, their past actions had set in motion events they could no longer control. One fateful evening, as they were enjoying a quiet dinner at home, a knock on the door shattered their sense of security. Jack froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Emma's heart raced, her mind flashing back to the hidden room and the treasures it held. "Who could that be?" Emma whispered, her voice tinged with panic. Jack stood, his legs feeling like lead, as he made his way to the door. He peered through the peephole and felt his blood run cold. Standing on the porch was a man with an air of authority and menace, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings with a cold, calculating gaze. Jack opened the door, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "Can I help you?" The man stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway. "I'm Marco Santini," he said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "I believe this house used to belong to my mother." Jack's mind raced. He had heard the name Santini before, whispered in conversations about organized crime and dangerous dealings. His heart pounded as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I'm sorry, Mr. Santini, but we bought this house from the bank. It was vacant for years." Marco's eyes narrowed, a predatory smile playing at his lips. "Yes, I'm aware. You see, before I was indisposed, I hid something valuable in this house. I'm here to collect it." Jack's stomach dropped. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," he said, though he knew it was futile. Marco stepped closer, his smile fading. "Don't play games with me. I want my money, my belongings, and everything else you found. Now." Jack swallowed hard, his mind racing for a way out. "We've spent some of the money," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "But we can get it back. Just give us some time." Marco's expression hardened. "You have 1 week to return everything, or there will be consequences. And don't even think about going to the police. I have eyes everywhere." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jack standing in the doorway, trembling. Emma joined him, her face pale with fear. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jack closed the door and turned to her, his eyes filled with dread. "We have 1 week to get everything back, or else." The reality of their situation hit them like a ton of bricks. The hidden fortune that had brought them so much joy now threatened to destroy their lives. They had to act fast, but as the days ticked by, the weight of their secret grew heavier, and the shadow of Marco Santini loomed larger. Jack and Emma sat in their living room, the atmosphere heavy with tension. The once cozy space, adorned with their ill-gotten gains, now felt like a cage. The clock on the wall ticked ominously, each second a reminder of the deadline looming over them. They had 6 days to gather what remained of Marco's fortune and figure out how to repay what they had spent. "We have to sell everything," Jack said, his voice tinged with desperation. "The watches, the clothes, even the car. We need to get as much cash together as possible." Emma nodded, her eyes filled with anxiety. "What about the money we've already spent? We can't possibly get it all back." Jack rubbed his temples, trying to think clearly. "We can take out loans, max out our credit cards, anything to buy us more time. Maybe we can convince Marco to give us an extension." Emma's heart sank. The idea of being further indebted, especially to someone like Marco, was terrifying. But they had no other options. Over the next few days, they sold everything they could. Jack reached out to his contacts, discreetly offloading the luxury items at a fraction of their value. Emma visited pawn shops and consignment stores, her heart breaking with each item she parted with. The car, once a symbol of their success, was sold for less than half its original price. They drained their savings, maxed out their credit cards, and took out personal loans, hoping against hope that it would be enough. By the end of the week, they had managed to scrape together a substantial amount, but it still fell short of what they owed. The day of reckoning arrived. Marco knocked on their door, his expression unreadable. Jack handed him the money they had gathered, his hands shaking. Marco counted the cash, his face betraying no emotion. When he finished, he looked up at them, his eyes cold. "This is a good start," he said, slipping the money into a bag. "But it's not enough. You still owe me, and I expect you to make up the difference by working for me." Jack and Emma exchanged a panicked glance. "Working for you?" Jack repeated, his voice trembling. Marco nodded. "I have tasks that need doing, deliveries, pickups, errands. You do as I say, and we'll consider your debt paid, but cross me and you'll regret it." Jack and Emma had no choice but to agree. Their lives were no longer their own, but they hoped that by cooperating, they could eventually free themselves from Marco's grasp. Life under Marco's thumb was a waking nightmare. Jack and Emma were thrust into a world of crime and danger, far removed from their once peaceful existence. Marco's tasks were varied and often perilous. They delivered packages to remote locations, met with shady individuals, and laundered money through their accounts. Each task carried the risk of arrest, or worse, but they had no choice but to comply. Marco moved into their house, claiming a guest room as his own. His presence was a constant reminder of their perilous situation. He monitored their every move, making sure they followed his orders to the letter. Their home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The first delivery was the hardest. Jack and Emma drove to a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, their nerves frayed. They handed over a package to a gruff, tattooed man who eyed them suspiciously. The man counted the contents, nodded, and disappeared into the shadows. Jack and Emma breathed a sigh of relief, but their ordeal was far from over. Each task brought new dangers. They drove through unfamiliar neighborhoods, dealt with intimidating figures, and handled large sums of cash. They became adept at hiding their fear, putting on brave faces as they navigated Marco's criminal underworld. Emma struggled the most. She missed the comfort and safety of their old life, the simple pleasures they had taken for granted. She became withdrawn, her once bright spirit dimmed by the constant fear and stress. Jack tried to support her, but he was struggling too. The weight of their secret and the demands of their new life were taking a toll on their relationship. One night, after a particularly harrowing delivery, they sat in their living room, the silence between them heavy. Emma looked at Jack, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't keep doing this, Jack. I'm scared all the time. I miss our old life." Jack took her hand, his heart breaking for her. "I know, Emma. I miss it too. But we have to stay strong. We have to believe that we can get through this." They clung to each other, drawing strength from their shared pain. They knew they had to find a way out, but for now, all they could do was survive. Weeks turned into months, and Jack and Emma became entrenched in Marco's world. They learned to navigate the criminal underworld with a mix of caution and cunning, adapting to the dangers they faced. But the toll on their lives was immense. Their friends and family noticed the change in them, but Jack and Emma couldn't reveal the truth. They became isolated, their social circles shrinking as they withdrew from the world. The stress of their situation affected their health. Jack developed chronic headaches and Emma suffered from anxiety attacks. Their relationship, once a source of strength, began to fracture under the strain. They argued frequently, the constant fear and pressure turning them against each other. One night, after a particularly tense argument, Jack stormed out of the house. He drove aimlessly, his mind racing. He felt trapped, desperate for a way out, but unable to see a path forward. As he drove through the dark streets, he thought about the hidden room and the fortune that had brought them to this point. It had been a blessing turned curse, a dream that had quickly morphed into a nightmare. Meanwhile, Emma sat alone in their bedroom, tears streaming down her face. She felt a crushing sense of guilt and regret. She had supported Jack's decisions, but now she questioned every choice they had made. She longed for the simplicity of their old life, the days when they were happy with what they had, even if it wasn't much. As Jack drove, he passed by a police station. A wild thought crossed his mind. What if he turned himself in? What if he confessed everything and asked for protection? But he quickly dismissed the idea. Marco's reach was far and wide. If they went to the police, they would be signing their death warrants. When Jack returned home, he found Emma asleep, her face still wet with tears. He felt a surge of protectiveness and guilt. He knew they couldn't go on like this, but he didn't know how to break free. He lay down beside her, vowing to find a way to get them out of this mess. Desperation led Jack and Emma to devise a risky escape plan. They couldn't keep living under Marco's control, but they knew that leaving wouldn't be easy. They decided to gather evidence of Marco's activities and turn it over to the FBI, hoping to secure their protection in exchange. Jack bought a small hidden camera and started recording their interactions with Marco. Emma took meticulous notes, documenting every delivery and transaction. They used burner phones to communicate with the FBI, setting up secret meetings to pass along the information they gathered. It was a dangerous game. Marco was suspicious by nature, and they had to be extremely careful not to arouse his suspicion. Every time they recorded a conversation or took a photo, their hearts raced with fear. They knew that if Marco found out, their lives would be over. Despite the risks, they clung to the hope that their plan would work. They dreamed of a future free from fear where they could start over and rebuild their lives. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to fight for their freedom. The night of the planned raid arrived, and the tension in the house was palpable. Jack and Emma had passed along enough evidence to the FBI, and the agents were ready to move in. Jack and Emma tried to act normal, but their anxiety was hard to hide. Marco, ever observant, sensed something was off. He confronted Jack in the living room, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You've been acting strange lately, Jack. Is there something you want to tell me?" Jack's heart pounded in his chest. "No, Marco, everything's fine. We're just tired, that's all." Marco stepped closer, his presence menacing. "I hope for your sake that's true, because if I find out you've betrayed me..." Before he could finish, the sound of breaking glass filled the air. FBI agents stormed the house, guns drawn. Chaos erupted as Marco's men fought back, bullets flying and shouts echoing through the halls. Jack and Emma ducked for cover, their hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. In the midst of the chaos, Marco managed to escape, slipping out through a back door. The agents secured the house, but their main target had eluded them. Jack and Emma were quickly whisked away, the agents promising them protection, but warning that Marco was still at large. Jack and Emma were placed in witness protection, relocated to a new town with new identities. Their lives had been turned upside down, but they were grateful to be alive. The luxury items and money were long gone, and their dream home was just a painful memory. Despite their new start, the fear of Marco's return loomed large. They lived each day looking over their shoulders, forever haunted by the hidden room that changed their lives. They worked to rebuild their relationship, finding solace in each other. The ordeal had scarred them, but it had also shown them the strength of their bond. They knew they would never be the same, but they held on to the hope that one day they could live without fear. Jack found work as a mechanic, and Emma took a job at a local library. Their new lives were simple and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured. They avoided making close friends, wary of revealing too much about their past. But they found comfort in the small joys of everyday life, appreciating the freedom they had fought so hard to regain. As the years passed, the fear began to fade. Marco remained at large, but he seemed to have disappeared, leaving Jack and Emma to slowly rebuild their lives. They never forgot the lessons they had learned, and they remained vigilant, always ready for the day when their past might catch up with them. In the end, they found a measure of peace. They had survived a nightmare and come out the other side, scarred but stronger. The hidden room was a memory, a dark chapter in their lives that they had closed for good. They knew that the future was uncertain, but they faced it together, united by the love and resilience that had seen them through the darkest of times. Until one fateful evening, a knock on the door shattered their sense of security.